Welcome everyone to the September Apple Core of Dallas Super Saturday meeting. This month we have member Bob Cecil giving us a presentation on assistive technologies. So I'll turn it over to Bob.
Okay. Woohoo. I'm actually calling this my rabbit hole version of the presentation because we will be ducking down several, and this is multiple generations in, but I was beginning to feel a little bit like Alice myself by the time I finished it, because I wandered so far from the original text. But I figured a bunch of the guys here, and it's certainly looking that way, might have been around long enough to remember some of the things that I'm talking about at least, and that's going to help. Originally, this was kind of going to be an overview, and I kept the same order of business in terms of this oblique definition introduction, and it's definitely going to be oblique, starts by defining what assistive technologies are, both as Apple has seen it, as others see them, and more recently how I have come to see them and how they're classified. One of the rabbit holes is I want to change the classification scheme to something that I think is a little bit better. But there really is no good classification scheme out there for assistive technologies because there are so many of them and so many different ways of classifying them that do make sense. But after that, I'm going to give an example of my final classification, personal classification, and then talk about why they're needed. The one other thing I wanted to cover on this slide is, was anybody here ever a part of the Apple University Consortium? The Apple University Consortium is the people who published Wheels for the Mind. And a lot of my ideas do date all the way back to the late 80s and 70s and 80s actually for the consortium. Yes, yes, yes. And it had the coolest logo, which I was unable to get a free copy of, or I would have put it on this slide, but it's the guy with the backpack on a bicycle with a computer sticking up out of it. An original Mac sticking out of it and the mouse dangling along behind as he pedals. But anyway, the bicycle story is a good one because the bicycle story is, and the Wheels for the Mind theme came from an analogy, which was the big cats run far faster than we do. I think it was 13 times fast as a human. For a puma or jaguar or other members of the big cat family. But if you put a guy on a bicycle, you increase his biomechanical efficiency so much that he actually goes faster than a big cat or can if he's a good bicyclist, and with less energy, 3 times faster in terms of the amount of energy per the distance consumed. So, Wheels for the Mind, I still think of as a...
You were in that, the consortium?
I was not part of the consortium. I was never a member of it, but I did subscribe to Wheels for the Mind. So, it was a magazine type booklet that Apple put out. Pretty cool thing. Now, good. You're not seeing all my chart chunk on your screen. My first problem in trying to look at classifications is Apple initially started using the common definition for assistive technologies, which is they were for people with vision, hearing, mobility, speech, or cognitive problems. That was a pretty narrow focus. Apple is moving beyond it now, but it still is impacting where they put a lot of their assistive technologies and the way, at least in a heritage sense, that they viewed assistive technologies And it's more of an impediment than a real benefit anymore, because you find assistive technologies scattered on the system side across different platforms with different technologies involved. I should have brought some water. And with programs, and in the systems folder, there's an accessibility panel, which is supposed to be the main way to get into it, but far from being the only one. Each of those classification schemes does have some value with it, but the disability approach of all the different classifications had the most problem. One of them is it focuses on rectifying deficits, where, in my view, assistive technologies need to become more about enhancements and how to make people better at what they do. So my definition of assistive is that it should mean anything that helps you do a better job. Here's some of the other techniques that do make sense, and boy, that's barely readable. But you can classify assistive technologies by disability, by platform, and that actually has some utility in terms of thinking about what are the unique capabilities, and this is getting more true, not less, of your watch, your AirPods, your Mac, your phone, your AVP, and whatever else you may have. So thinking about what assistive technologies fit best by platform and what enhancements work best with the unique capabilities of that platform is something that's well worth doing. You start thinking about them by program, and they do differ some by program, and they differ by program by platform too. But that gets way too complicated as far as I'm concerned. By function, again, there are so many possibilities and overlaps that becomes rather cumbersome. My own personal favorite as a classification scheme is a bit of a rabbit hole because it's combining the function and the
platform.
is combining the complexity of the assistive technology and the purpose of it. So let's get into that. If you are,
Fuzzy said,
sorry? Go ahead, Paul.
you used the term fuzzy sets, I vaguely remember.
Oh, okay. If you remember your, I guess it's high school math, it's back there a ways. Fuzzy set is one that is not well defined and not mutually exclusive and not exhaustive. So if you've got something that is both a brain builder, which I'll come to in a minute, but it's based on a shortcut, what is it? You know, how should it really be classified? It's hard to classify a lot of these things because they fall under multiple headings. But if you classify by complexity, you've got more shortcuts than anything else. I mean, you've got thousands of shortcuts. And again, they are going to differ somewhat by program more than anything else. But most command keys are going to be the simplest level of complexity because they just do one thing and it's very clear cut what they do. Moving up the scale, you get into applets and applications. Apple does not tend to see applications as assistive technologies, but I would take strong issue with that because to me, something like Freeform, that is definitely an assistive technology. Something like Keynote is an assistive technology because it is allowing you to do things that would have been very difficult, at least before Think Tank. That's kind of, and applications probably deserves to be separate thing on the scale.
What's that?
Evil spirit.
An applet is a little, you go in the
Well, I
systems
do.
folder, you see a bunch of options. Most of them are based on apps. You look on you look on the widgets on your iPhone or whatever device you're looking at. Those are applets. They're not full applications, but they're little make it easy for me bits of programming. So, but a lot of assistive technologies are applets, probably more than anything else beyond shortcuts. There aren't that many there's a bunch of applications now, unlike the day when I could run everything available on the Mac and knew it and owned it. But you know, that passed as of about 1989. So, but anyway, that's very much an aside.
You could say you knew everything about the Mac.
Could say I had it. Could say I used it. Can't afford to do that no more, you lucky dogs. But anyway, often assistive technologies work better when they're used in combination. So that's higher up the scale. For instance, if you are,
Well, I mean, the Zoom
I had
applet
it.
thing is,
I'm sorry?
well, I mean, like the Zoom is an applet. It's.
Yeah, the Zoom is an
it's
applet.
it enhances already existing programs, but,
Yeah.
applications, but it's just an applet.
Yeah,
itself.
and that's a reasonably simple applet that's embedded inside most programs these days. Speech compression is an applet, which is embedded inside most websites if they are heavily.
Speech compression.
Speech compression is a technology that I think will relate to the talk again in a few minutes, but it basically, when you're watching a web page, I mostly crank it up to 1.5 times the normal speaking speed,
Yeah.
and that's done using speech compression.
Twice normal speed.
It came out of my industry in the I think it started in the 60s, but really in the 70s, where, like speed reading, they found that comprehension and liking, actually, we found, I should say, I was there at the time, that both comprehension and efficiency go up if you speed read and if you compress the speech, if it's something that you're watching on a screen, for instance. So it's a win-win situation for you and the consumer, because they're getting the information that much faster and more efficiently. Speech compression is also a good example of a brain builder, in that I think it, by focusing you more, you learn to concentrate better, and that's good for you, and that's good for your brain. And that actually leads me to my next combinations. I think that's obvious, but one of the other things that should be said at this point is combining assistive technologies often makes them far more interesting and useful than they are individually. And that's another problem with trying to classify them. Because, for instance, the one thing that really got me excited in this year's product presentation was the new thing Apple has introduced this year is live translation.
Yeah.
I want my great-grandchildren to find some foreigners where they can have Zoom conferences and listen to the other side speaking in whatever is their native tongue, and hopefully there will be more than one of them. In space, you use in space now, Paul, I know, because I showed it to you. Carl, my friend de Cordova, is in a in space meeting where there were people speaking in 6 different languages, and Carl had logged on because as an Air Force brat, he was in Turkey during the critical period and is a native, semi-native speaker of Turkic. So he logged on to have everything translated into Turkic for him, but he was on with people who were speaking Hindi, come on, the main Chinese, Mandarin, French. I can't remember them all. There were 6 different languages being spoken, and all of them were being translated into Turkic for him. So, and there was a native English speaker on there too. But that's a good example of using multiple assistive things at once, and it makes them far more powerful. Okay, my real example for brain builders was here comes the next rabbit hole. I went back to the very first assistive technology I learned or accessed because it illustrates a number of points in this presentation. We need to back up a little further and look at the reading process first. And the current research still indicates that the first stage of reading is to sound it out one letter at a time. So the second thing you do is you sound out a word like S-L-O-W. So if your first word is A, that's A slow. And then you go on to learning words. And this again appears to be native in human children, which is the ability to memorize the sound of a word, the phonemes of a word, and hear slow when you see that presented to you for reading. So A, slow, way to read would be an example of word at a time reading. Most children don't get past this right away. They have to get enough words loaded into memory that they can begin to move on to clauses or sentences. But what happens next, and a lot of children do learn to widen their vision enough, because part of this, the next part of the process is to look at the page, pull it into memory, pull those little squiggles into your memory, and inside your brain up pops the words, and if you're really good, maybe the clause or even the sentence. But most people do not automatically learn to do that.
I had somebody who studied me for sleep apnea all night, a neurologist or something.
Okay.
But she told me she could read a page at a time, and it made sense.
Yeah. Okay, that takes me back to my own personal story. What impressed me in the late 50s was JFK because of all the articles that came out about how, as president, he was reading between 2,500 and 3,000 words per minute. And with all the paperwork that he had to deal with as president, that made him much more efficient. That's where it was really a brain builder. But you are learning different things at each of these stages. You know, you're learning the sounds of letters. Takes a lot of repetition. Most parents spend, if they're good parents, spend a lot of time with the alphabet song, with flashcards, with getting their kids to recognize and able to sound out a letter before they go to school, or even sound out a word before they go to school. But once the current research, most of it is saying, at least in English, lots of caveats here, that there are 2 different ways to read. One is the sounded out method, and then using, I've lost the words, may have them here. But anyway, some people continue to read by sounding it out, but that's never going to be terribly efficient. You're never going to get much above 100 or 200 words per minute if you have to do it that way. Once you get over articulating, moving your lips and mouth and jaw to sound out the words, and start just bringing them in and picking them up inside your brain, you can get up to maybe 4 300 or 400 words per minute for the average good reader.
I had something that might be a sliding easel. It's a bar that goes down the page. And
That's my next point. Thank you, Paul.
What's the tackiest about? Hope you can tell about that to him. It sounds
Okay,
familiar, but I don't remember.
the technology that I was introduced to, along with and that's why I can call it a technology, was exactly that. It was a four-legged artist's easel set up on a tabletop with a page of print on top of it and a mask attached to a sliding device where you could control the speed as the mask came down and covered more and more of the page. But the instruction was probably the more important thing. And as you move into clauses, probably, I think that was it for me, or looking for a paragraph at a time, well, there are some other learnings that you have to have. You have to learn to decode from syntax what is a clause quick enough to see each clause at a time. Then you need to widen your eyes enough. You need to train your brain and your vision enough to recognize what is a paragraph. Now, the good news about all these things is when you think about how English is structured, it's structured to make that easy. You have spaces between, well, you have kerning between letters, then you have spaces between words, then you have periods to define sentences. Sometimes you have punctuation to help you decode what's a clause, so as your eye continues to widen just a little bit, you can pick out the clauses and then later pick out the sentences. Doing that, you can get up to maybe 400 or 600 words per minute, which I think was about where I was before I started being trained to recognize a paragraph. Again, in English, you have plenty of cues for that. Then to process a full page, what you begin to do when you process a full page is learn, and there's another fancy word for this, but it's the bits of a sentence that are extraneous, like the word the.
There was something, I went to New York to learn how to speed read
Mm-hmm.
and you read a book backwards, so you won't bother with normal sequencing and get an idea about what's going on by reading it backwards, and then you make pictures connecting things.
Uh-huh.
And somebody in Marlon Scully's laser group said, Marlon Scully said, go read this book.
Uh-huh.
All the Russians in the laboratory, the optical laboratory,
Started on the back
it's
end.
an awful book. Says, I'm reading it backwards.
Okay.
That way I'll appreciate when I read it forwards.
Fair enough. Now, it could also be done by tachistoscope, and that was the replacement for the sliding easel in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, and it can be adjusted again to flash a single letter on the screen, A, then do SLOW as a series of flashes on the screen, and then go on to clauses and go on to sentences and go on to paragraphs and go on to partial or full page at one time. And that's probably a more efficient way to do it, but the learning changes at each stage. The assistive technology for it changes at each stage. But speed reading to me is an excellent example of a brain builder because it teaches you to think in new ways. And I think there are quite a few brain builders in the Apple ecosystem already. But we need to do a better job of identifying them and a better job of getting our kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids up to date on them. So I think some of the things that are good examples, dictation and outlining. You really have to organize your thoughts when you learn to dictate. You really don't want to send it off to the typing pool. Yeah,
What I,
in the mid '80s, I
I
was
got
sending stuff to
something
the typing pool,
I
and
got I got something called ACTA. It was cheaper than
okay,
Owl Technology stuff, and and it has headlines, and you write paragraphs and things. But you can also write latex. All right. So I was doing my homework in graduate school with this thing that I had this structure that I could navigate with my mind, and then that was the one time that it was honored in the
school
graduate
system.
level mathematics, which belittled me a lot,
Hmm.
where I had taught they could just interfere with my with questions and all. I didn't have a logical sequence that I had to follow. I could respond to people because I had it all in my mind in some kind of structure,
Okay,
and they were impressed. The one time.
fair enough. Paul, we're at 11:30. I'm going to try and keep this within a reasonable time frame. We're on slide 4 out of 11 or 12. So if I can, if I
Time
can,
management.
yeah, I'm going to manage you a little bit, but I apologize for that. I think some of these are kind of interesting, though. Do you remember watching the movie where they put up a spider map on the wall that takes up the whole wall, where they're looking at all the suspects and the linkages between them? Well, Apple enables spider map in freeform, or idea mapping more generally in the freeform program. That to me may be another brain building tech. Can't quite be sure because we have not really done enough to evaluate how each of these things does build your brain and your mental capabilities. I know dictation did also for me because I really learned to think logically, coherently, and with an outline before I started sending things off to the typing pool using the tape system in the mid 80s. You call them up on your phone, they had a big machine attached to it. You speak into the phone, but you had to know what your dictation, where your dictation was going to go before you started that process. So that was another one that, another example that may be a brain builder is collaborative ideation training and ideation platforms on the Mac. And I think in general that the good thing about brain building activities is the more different perspectives you have for looking at things and thinking about things, and the more your brain grows, the more effective you become as a human being. The next is music theory. My sister taught the Suzuki method for ear training, and she swore that it had an impact on the mathematical skills of her classes, and she won a lot of awards for her classes. And there is also, and I have not had the time to do it, but I wish I did. There are also programs for learning music theory to which we should be exposing young children. The next thing I already talked about is doing live translation and maybe with captioning via Zoom to have your grandkids, and this even down in the critical period below age 8 would be a good thing, maybe without the captioning, to learn foreign languages. How much faster would that go if you were talking with other people, hearing it in English, but also hearing it in the native tongue at the same time? The next thing is I think we need to enrich our communications, maybe by doing things like layering. One of the things that I was thinking about doing and did do to some extent initially in the speaker notes is having a way to add asides, larger observations. Hypertext kind of was a example, but hypertext is painful to fully implement. But to what extent will enriched communications, to what extent does looking things up on the web, at the drop of a hat, which is not a habit I'm in yet, but to what extent is the younger generation getting ahead of us because they do things like that? So I put brain building technologies at the head of the class in terms of what they're good for, or formative technology, if you want to call it that. But I,
Do you use ChatGPT or Grok or any of those?
I'm sorry,
Do you use ChatGPT or Grok or any of those?
can't hear.
ChatGPT or Grok or?
Yeah, yeah. To what extent are those going to? Good example. Okay. Why do we need to do these things? That was the third and final part where I'm going to go back and forth a bit of this presentation. Well, for the first time, I think we have multiple crises happening to us as a species at the same time. I do not understand why polarization seems to be getting so much worse than it has been in prehistory. But I think, just as an empirical matter, that we are splintering into small interest groups. We are seeing more and more hate between nations at the same time that war is getting significantly more dangerous. And the options for war, like chemical warfare and even more biological warfare, are significantly worse. I see people diverging much more than they are converging as a result of that polarization. Now, you don't have to.
The consensus is it's the internet and the.
I'm sorry, can you turn so I can hear?
It's the consensus is so far that I've heard is that it's the internet and the ability to use our tools like phones and iPads is making it worse. That's the consensus that.
Fair
I
enough.
don't know if it's true or not, but.
Fair enough. You're going to give up your phone? Going to give up your iPad? I'm not.
No,
Also,
I'm not, but, well.
So we're
Here's the question, and I'll let you go on. If it would solve the problems, would you give it up? Think about that.
I don't think we would.
no, I don't. I agree.
Interesting, there's a poll recently for teenagers, would they give up a car or they give up their phone? And nowadays, they would give up the car before a phone.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And at my age, we wouldn't give up anything to the car. That was our.
That's right. That was.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. Ooh, I'm getting my own amplification now. Okay. The second thing is, and this is kind of the same thing as divergence, but it's over specialization. And we're now in a society that's so complex that if you take out a couple of, the heck with those, if you take out a couple of key specialists, our ability to run our complex economy falls apart. Just like if you take out a couple of our key industries, our economy falls apart. And that scariness is another thing that is adding to the divergence. Agree, Paul? Anyway, so I think the crisis of having such a complex, over-specialized economy and combining that with the divergence are always been there to an extent, but worse than they ever were. Personally, I think the bulk of our problems are really coming more from those things than for artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence is adding another crisis in its own right. There's a lot of doomsday saying about how they're going to wipe us out and take over. If there's a possibility of that, I see it as at least a decade away, and I'm not going to have to worry about it.
I agree. I'm not a problem.
Yeah, and artificial intelligence has ways to go before we get there. But I think our problems are likely to come from within. But they do seem to be coming faster, harder, and wilder than they ever have before. So, how do we deal with those things? And this is where I'm coming to the conclusion that we need to evolve. And one of the ways we need to evolve is to start becoming a lot more intelligent about not only assistive technologies, but enhanced technologies, brain builders, expanding our capabilities. And then there's also the fact that I think we have more within us than we know. But I'll come to that in a minute. If we're looking at man versus our artificial intelligence, AI clearly has some strengths: speed, data capacity, how much it can store and retrieve and process within a given period of time. Apparently, it's more cost efficient, but that's something we might talk about a little bit more. Summarization, meaning you take huge bodies of information, throw it into ChatGPT, and there's what it's all about, and there's a good written summary of it that you can read at your leisure, because it will be leisurely compared to the way the AI did it. The other thing about AIs that is interesting is programmability. It's easier for an AI to evolve than for me to evolve, because you change the programming and you've got a new critter on your hands. So I think that's another strength of artificial intelligence, which might actually work to our benefit. And then the final thing about AIs is convergent thinking. I think what they are really, and this is a little speculative, but I think you take several different AIs and you throw the same data set at them, they're going to come back with pretty similar summaries, results, conclusions, and implications. AIs work better at finding the common elements compared to humans. But if you look at human strengths, there's not much sure. Okay, that's the first thing we have to say, because we don't know much about ourselves. But divergence, our greatest weakness, is kind of one of our strengths, because you take 400 million people in the US and you're going to find plenty of different opinions. I think we are better at non-linear logic. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that, but I think there is something about the quantum processing in our brain, mental makeup, that makes us better at anticipation, at making wild leaps, and even at perceiving reality in a different way. Because when you are driving, for instance, your senses are about a half second behind where you're at on the road. You see yourself as here with these other cars around you, but actually you're a half second ago in terms of what has registered in your senses. Your brain is using that to project a reality that appears current to you. That's one of our problems too, by the way, because it makes it very easy to take a human and get them to perceive a reality that is not solely dictated by our senses. But if that's a problem, let's make it a benefit, because it leads to creativity. And I think it may be that there are some niches just from these things, let alone others. Go ahead, Ray.
Can I ask a question?
Huh?
And I can give you all the time you want, no problem.
Okay.
Are you saying that driving a car, the brain is compensating for being behind a half a second to project into the future?
Yeah.
So the brain is taking care of that itself.
That's what the latest research seems to indicate. You see yourself as in this current moment.
This happens in music.
But in what? Yeah, I hear your words. I hear your words, and I'm predicting enough of it.
F-16s in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm flying it, 600 miles an hour,
Yep.
it's a whole different problem with being in a car.
Yep.
I'm way more than a half second, you know?
Yep.
So you're saying the training that we got.
It's still a half-second lag time, yes, but you're,
Much farther
You're a lot
down
further
the-
distance than that. It's 600 miles
that's
an
what the
hour.
most current brain research seems to indicate. Yeah.
Because I can tell you that, let's say I'm flying what we call a low-level mission to drop practice bombs, you know, out in the rain. Now, 500 feet.
You better be projecting your reality well.
It didn't appear to me
No,
that it was.
you do not experience it. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I was able to keep up with that, flying at 600 miles an hour, but I'm up, so my viewpoint is different than if I was on the ground at 600 miles an hour.
yeah.
So the brain is adjusting for that, and
And apparently is able to. Isn't that bizarre?
it's bizarre.
Yeah. Welcome to the rabbit hole. But yeah, and I don't understand quantum processing. You know, it may be even be that something in our brain is foreseeing the future better than we ever thought it could.
I've heard people say when they get into an accident that time seems to slow down for them.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that has anything to do with what you're talking about.
And my heading on this topic is more research needed. But that's why we need to build some brain builders. Anyway, and the reason for this is the other big issue that we have is cooperation. We need to define some niches where we can work together with other intelligent beings. And I'm not limiting that to AIs, by the way. They're just the one where the need is most apparent. But you know, what are dolphins and whales better at than we are? And to the flyer in the audience, thinking in 3D is probably one of them. You know, we don't have a sense of radar yet. Should we develop one? Would that change our brain in meaningful ways, our sonar or what have you?
We spent a lot of time in our training and our practice trying to think in 3D about where other planes in the sky were around us.
Yeah.
With limited, you know, we're talking about mid to late 80s. I had a limited radar, but you had to take that information and build the 3D picture in your head.
Yeah.
Where these other planes were.
Yeah.
And we spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah.
Well, you have to be good at that because that's everything.
Oh yeah.
And what I'm hoping in 5 or 10 years to be able to say is there's an app for that that'll train you that way, and I would definitely put it in the brain buster category.
F-35 has like a Apple Vision Pro headset, and you point and click and kill people.
Yeah.
And
And the Apple Vision
see
Pro,
through the cockpit. You see through the metal all around you.
yeah, that's the one piece of tech I do have, and the ability to think in 3D was a major reason, and Apple has not begun to realize the possibilities in their own technology there, and they need to. But that's another presentation. So I think what's really needed for us in the world ahead, I'll throw another one out there as long as we're sharing our rabbit holes. What if a extraterrestrial species ever gets a hold of us? What are our niches going to be then? And I think the need for mankind is to begin to develop a better understanding of what we're good at and what our niches might be under a variety. You know, I'm sorry, Rick, I'd take a dolphin as my pilot ahead of you in a dogfight. I would, just because they can, you know, for them thinking in 3D is automatic.
Right.
So, welcome to the rabbit hole. Starting to feel like Alice yet? The fact is, and I got got a graduate degree from the Committee on Human Development, which is why a lot of this stuff is interesting to me. But the fact is, McNeil was one of the people who wrote the first computerized program for understanding speech, understanding language, how the black box really works inside the human brain. He and Carol Friedman, his primary, when I was at Chicago, are way behind the times now. They're not even mentioned in the literature hardly at all anymore. We really know very little about how our computer processes speech. Freeman was able to write a program that could do a good job having a computer understand speech and process it. The INRC group, which I was forced to memorize, not that big a deal, was a critical part of that. You can do it with the computer commands. I don't even remember all the words. Reversal, integration, anyway. Negation, reversal, and flip-flop, whatever the fourth one was. You can write a computer program to understand speech, as we now know from that, but in terms of how it works in our brains, we don't really know. And the alternate pathway that also applies is, how do you take if you have a bunch of words in your memory, the bigger vocabulary you have memorized, the more articulate your speech. But that's English. That does not describe how you read and write backwards in Hebrew, or
Or go to a tonal language, or go to
the tonal elements of Chinese, or the tick-tock of the African tribes. We don't really understand why our perception continues to operate a half second ahead of the reality, or ahead of the information that's come in. We don't really understand why memory turns out to be so malleable, where people have false memories a lot of the time and don't really know. We need to figure out much more of those things, about all those things and more, if we're really going to get into a better understanding of our own heads. Almost nothing is known about precognition, but that ability to think a half second ahead may indicate that it's more of a capability than we're willing to realize. And I myself have had cases of dreams about things that happened much later, and provably. I mean, the big one is we were at a dining hall with my aunt and my grandmother from my mom and my dad's side of the family, and those two sides of my family hated each other. So that was an improbable event in itself. The dining room, the annex that we were in, was a triangular room. We were seated around a circular table, and out the window you saw the Arizona desert. Now, that was a fairly improbable combination of events to dream about, and yet I saw it 2 years before it happened. So to me, that was, and Suzanne can tell you similar stories. My wife will tell you she also thinks she had stronger precognition early on than she did later. So we don't know about telepathy, but the stories still abound. The ability to live in alternate realities suggests something about us, which our Gen Z is beginning to show. For some of them, they can live there full time, which is kind of scary in itself, but for other reasons. And so can...
being a furry or something.
Sorry? And so do schizoids. The evidence is pretty good that people with schizophrenia are living in an alternate reality. So we don't know enough about how the quantum element of our thought process enters into that, if that's what's doing it. And we don't know the internal structure of our brains, which shows things bouncing all over the place as memorization happens. So there's a lot to learn in terms of human potential. And I think the time is here, not just coming, where we need to start exploring some stuff that seems like Alice in Wonderland. So my conclusions are, and I did finish by 12. My conclusions are, first of all, let's define assistive technologies as anything that makes people do better. And let's focus more on enhancements than on disabilities. Let's classify our assistive whatchamacallums by the level of complexity, which is shortcuts, applets, full applications, combinations, and brain builders. And let's evolve, because we are going to need some, in my humble opinion, if we're going to avoid the crisis that we're beginning to experience. And along with that, we need to find cooperativeness for ourselves and other intelligent beings. My one other trip to the next rabbit hole is I would like to propose starting, although I don't have the energy to be the leader of it, a alliance of sentient individuals, and include those individuals who happen to be different AIs, or different species, or extraterrestrials. So on that bizarre note, I'm open for questions.
Penrose said something that was like a confession. He said, we test people, but we miss some people that don't think, like the test, and we might lose the creativity, what they can contribute. I know how to say it as good as he did, but
Yeah, no, I think I hear you. We're pretty good at stop share. I'm going to do this too. Hold on a sec. We're pretty good at forcing people into straitjackets, and we definitely have forced our scientific community into straitjackets. And stop sharing. Where's the mouse? Show me a mouse.
For you. What is that you're using there?
Uh,
To do your presentation.
I did my notes in Notes and not as speaker notes on Keynote, but the presentation itself is in Keynote. And I really need to learn to use Keynote better.
No. It just didn't look like Keynote sitting up there, but what do I know?
No, I was huge on PowerPoint in the 90s and the aughts. When I worked at Radio Shack, it was all PC oriented.
Yeah, well,
But so I am a text only thinker. I think this is going to give me problems as long as we're sharing. And I'm trying to get to it.
Well, up top, there's a choice.
Well, okay, I got the mouse back. That will help. There we go. So, what was the question again, Paul? Oh, what software? I looked at Keynote about a year and a half ago and said, "Oh, this is way cooler than PowerPoint." Well, I'd always been a PowerPoint guy, and I thoroughly understand how to navigate and create and do speaker notes in PowerPoint. But
I'm not sure if that's true. I think PowerPoint is a little bit more advanced than Keynote.
No,
And even though I use it a lot, I think it is because